That's brilliant. Derbyshire, Italy, North London, Peak District, Peckham, Durham. Great to see everybody here. Okay, I think we're going to start. So a really, really warm welcome to you all from across the country and across the world. I see somebody here from India and from Italy. It's brilliant to be here with you this evening in Liverpool on this very beautiful evening. My welcome comes to you from me, Darren Rhys-Jones, and the Centre for New and International Writing at the University of Liverpool. My welcome is also on behalf of Liverpool University Press. We're delighted to have you all here to launch this year's 3 titles from Pavilion Poetry. Before we begin, I'm not going to take too long doing this. I just want to give formal thanks as well to 3 of our undergraduate students at Liverpool who worked this year as interns at Liverpool University Press and were responsible for bringing these books into the world. And they are Olivia Carpenter, Adam Noor, and Joseph Jackson. I'd also like to thank Alison Welsby at LUP and Lydia Osborne and Anthony Cond. Also a big thank you to my co-directors here at Liverpool of the Centre, Sandeep Palmer, David Herring and Danny O'Connor. And last but not least, our brilliant Centre administrator, Jess White, who's been responsible for sorting out this event this evening. We have a code in the chat function, which allows you to order the books from LUP on a 3-for-2 bundle. So do check that out. It's at the start of the chat, and I'll be reminding you about that before the end of the evening. We're going to keep things very simple. Our 3 poets are going to read each for 20 minutes. Then we'll have a chance for a chat, and then they'll read 1 more poem at the end. I'm not going to give big introductions, but it has been an absolute pleasure to work with these 3 brilliant poets this year, a real privilege, as it always is. And I'm always very grateful for all that gives to me, but the way in which these books speak with such care and attention at a time when there is such carelessness and grief in the world. So we're going to start off with Jemma Borg and her book Wilder.
Okay. Thank you, Darren. Can everyone hear me? Yeah, good. Thank you for that introduction. And I'd like to say so much, thank you so much to Darren for, being such a wonderfully committed and supportive editor. And thank you to everyone who's come tonight. It's lovely to see both poets and non-poets in the audience. I can see that. So Wilder, this book is divided sort of gently into sections. These sections all sort of speak to each other, and I'm going to read a little bit from each section, and I'll keep to some extent to the direction of travel through the book. There are, it seems to me anyway, a number of different themes and motifs around which these poems circulate, including hunger, loss, grief, and transformation. sorry, just a sec. The word grief comes from a Proto-Indo-European root meaning heavy, and there's a sense in which the poems sort of are positioned in relation to that weight, that sinking, and asking what can grow out of that. And growth is both upwards and downwards, of course, roots and leaves. So I'm going to start with this poem, which was written in Lutro in Crete, which I know many of you will know quite well. It's a small village on the southern coast without any roads, just dominated by the sea and the mountains. And the poem comes with an epigraph from the Greek poet Odysseus Elytus. My God, what blue you spend for us not to see you. So, shadows and warriors. Fresh water or salt, which is the ancestor of the other? The cold spring from the inner workings of the mountains twists into the bay, from the cafe at one end to the ferry terminus at the other. Like an oil, it crinkles and stretches, intermingling its almost crystalline smoke, making ladders of fresh water and shock in the warmer salt. The first few days, as you enter the water, you shiver, try not to overcompensate for the clustering cold, though it feels like failure, though the outer rind of you must soften, for something grows inside the work of swimming in the sea full of nothing but blue, the same blue Elytus spoke of, the blue that erases borders between sea and sky. Then today, for the first time, you step into the sea with a light heart, and at once there is a verification of fish, 6 small brown ones, maybe bream, turning at your feet as the tyranny of the self is shed, along with the cushioning and hunger at the center of your other life that by comparison seems as closed as a widow's house. Tell me, do you also think, when you hear the goats crying like children, that mind is not ours alone, but belongs to everything? Here, below the white bellies of gulls, below the sandstone and pumice of the mountains, slowly eroding at the water's edge, here where the 7 shepherds, the legendary Safakians, fought the war under a fierce moon, and the jeweled water did not look away as it streamed right out of the rock. There is this perfect swim in the molasses of the sea, in its glutinous cold and salt honey warmth that turn tepid and delicious as they slip into each other, as the wind has picked up a fraction, like shadows and warriors who are not fighting. And out on the Libyan Sea, where the hopeful drown on their way to Europe, a fish jumps. Geometrics of small waves, a little resistance in the smooth water, then you take on the armor of the deep sea, and the swimming is heading further into the thick blue magic, until the whole bay has gone, the radio in the taverna, the flag on its line, even the mountains immersed in air. Somewhere, up on the mountain path, there are 2 blue chairs placed in the shade of an olive tree. They are turned towards each other, like old friends chatting. The next poem is an ekphrastic piece that is written after a piece of visual art, in this case painting by Monet. And I spent the first part of my life working as a scientist, and as such I'm interested in the translations across science and poetry and how the two use language in particular ways, but also in how you can bring, I guess, the intellectual and sensual experiences together to make a fullness of representation. This poem is kind of like a series of translations, really. It's trying to enter the sea through seeing a painting and then writing that back into myself in a conscious act, which is, of course, always entangled with both sensuality and thought. Les pyramides de Port-Coton rough sea. Above the surface of the tide, shaped by the teeming sea, assertive, accurate, like submerged and sleeping thoughts that now are kneeling up again in the calm and motion, monosyllabic, momentarily bare, littering the ear as the foam withdraws. They catch light out of the shadows of monsters. What was hidden comes into view, each rock a method, a rhetoric of pauses and shining spires, barely there, then rearing bright again in the slender gulp of the sea. Is it evening? Is this song? Each moment is filled with water and air. You feel it, a freshness deep down, an understanding that's also visible. The sea clarifies, then shatters around each rock's obstacle. Some thoughts are taller than others, and some are hard to know in the body's roar. I was asked recently about intertextuality, so that's the use of or reference to work by different writers, perhaps in different genres, which I suppose I do quite a bit of in this book. That freshness deep down in the previous poem, of course, was Gerard Manley Hopkins. I suppose it feels impossible to have ideas or images without entanglement with what's gone before, but there's also that sense, I think, of permission, which art gives you, in the sense that you feel so much is possible, graspable, doable, when much of the time writing and life itself feels so impossible. So this next poem is written after Dante's Inferno, Canto 13, which has the trees in the forests formed from those who had committed suicide, and the harpies come and snap their branches, their limbs off, which then regrow. But the self in the tree can only speak when it's broken, when it's bleeding. Forest of the Suicides. Whatever you're not saying, another part of you is screaming. Even if you cut out its mouth, it fills again with blood. Have you ridden the word scent into the caverns of your body? Did you gouge out your ferocious heart? Then don't judge. Grief, the savage, can't be kept exact like a stone. It wilders, it sprouts, it pushes up through the plush valves of the heart, presses the white tips of your toes towards the earth's red core, your jugular brimming with sap, wood replacing bone, and it keeps on flourishing. No one here remembers the art of sunlight. Might the wounding pass us by? It might, if we're quiet enough, but I say let it come. To be split like a plum, I call it solace. I speak its sour sweetness. Okay, so there's this sort of double meaning which is shattering the word wild. Wild is a word with its roots in woodland or weald, and the area that I live in East Sussex is called the Weald. But there's also this obsolete verb to wilder, which means to lose your way or go astray, from which you get the word bewilderment. So I'm going to read what ended up being the title poem next, which sort of gathers up the various meanings, I guess, of wilder. And the poem comes with an epigraph from Mary Midgley, who was a British philosopher who had a lot to say about the need for science and poetry to communicate with each other, and also about the ways in which we value the so-called natural world in relation to our own human concerns. She says, love, like compassion, is not a rare fluid to be economized, but a capacity which grows by use. Wilder. Before you found the words of praise, or perhaps it was after, drunk to your toes, sloshed, wasted, Brahms and Liszt, as you swayed on bridges over black rivers, or caressed your skin with a knife to feel the tender script it writes, As you walked in the valley of fear, where the air thins to choking, you told yourself, get lost in the woods, be wilder, and left those in their cages to their sober pacing, to their abomination of soft drinks. And here you are, off the path, drunk until you truly do love everyone as you've always loved everything that wasn't human. And you're laughing, as that's the gift and the ruse. A contented little Buddha who has long contemplated falling leaves, the sky laying shades of blue on the face of a tranquil lake. There's no tomorrow, no after. Did you remember how to surface? Only now, where you plunge into a cold sea at midnight, the wreck of the moon clear-headed as rain, the water biting any hard heart it meets. Though it would be easy to shift only a little, to not be born, be drunk instead. Head to toes, vibrant in the wave, then boulder to shore, heavy as a tree, land falling onto sand, and the curved world catches you like a word lost, then the word is won. What's quite nice, I realised the other day about having the poems up on the screen as we have tonight is I don't have to tell you that the last word in that poem is W-O-N, not O-N-E. I suddenly realised that I had to specify that in a recent reading. Okay, so one of the themes in the book also is about childlessness. Being a mother for me was not one of those things that was always a given, and the book crosses that boundary between the two possibilities, being a mother or not, and the issues associated with both of them, such as how you fit into your family history, for instance, or sense of identity. So I'm going to read a short poem that I wrote after a scan we had of our son very early on in the first few weeks. And I was struck then very much by the imperative of life, how it really wants to live and grow, and that begins, it seems, with the heart, which is one of the first things to form in the fetus. And it forms as a two-valved organ, not the four valves that we are born with. Ultrasound. We have peaked, forgive us. To find you are barely more than a sound, a rally drum, a two-valved butterfly engine, piston rapid among bright halos of finger buds, a secret miner working in the sonorous mountain. We hear the river rushing, it's the river of all our bloods. This urgent heart is everything you are. And how good to hear you. As relics on the same mountainside have taught us, motion is life, and nothing grows if it cannot move. Outside, there are suburbs of nodding, acquiescent heads, the blue starless sky, and a chestnut tree shaking off its commotion of swallows. But here is where we begin and end. Here is the city where we live. The penthouse and public house, warehouse and slaughterhouse, merry-go-round and holy ground of the heart. So one of the things that I found about having a child was that death sits very closely to birth. And I suppose that, you know, you have a lot of sort of anxieties when you first have a baby. And for me, I think some of the general concerns I had, be it about climate change or the irreparable damage that we're doing to the planet and so on, began to sort of gain this very specific focus for a while, centered on my son, who came at the end of another sort of record-breaking year of hot summers and wet winters and so on. So this next poem is called Thread. When the moon slides out its curious tongue, when the bell marks the hour unheard, when the bulb goes out in a fizz, and the carpet is worn to a canvas, and the threads pull on a door, and the door opens to a field, and the field has horses where horses dream. when the end of the day comes, when the child at my breast feeds, when the child at my breast sleeps, when the child holds my hand, when my hands fall like leaves, when I am leaves and ash and snow, when the world turns. When my child opens his eyes alone, and the trail of his life unwinds, and his coat is worn to a canvas, and the canvas he works unfurls, and its threads pull on a door, and the door opens to a field where horses run, wild as dreams. When the end of days comes, and the bell slips from its yoke, and the door from its frame, and the field beyond is a field of thorns, then will we wake and find the loss is yet to come, and begin once more to break ourselves, each against the beauty of the other. Okay, I'm going to end with just this one more poem. I guess there's a sort of a movement towards authenticity in the book, whatever that might mean for an individual. But for me, I think it always it feels like trying to go so deep in yourself that you travel beyond personality. And this is where what is wild perhaps resides in us. This poem is called Soma, which is a word which means simply the physical body, everything but the reproductive parts of ourselves. It's used in biology, but it's another word with a shadow meaning. In this case, in Sanskrit, it refers to a special ritual drink, likely a psychedelic, that was considered to be consumed by gods to ensure their immortality. But of course, our own material bodily selves are defined by their ephemeral qualities. Soma. You are this breathing architecture. You are the grinding surface of your body's work, a commitment to the threshold, and you are also broken or breaking, raising the drunken gift of your life. What you are is a trick of cohesion, a circling of the sun, and like a foaming star, the substance of you is slowly dying. And though it may shatter like any construction, for the illness is nowhere, yet always relentless, what you are also blooms. Remember this, while you remain recognizably yourself, your perishable self, it's not possible to lie when you speak out of the body's mine. Thank you.
Jemma, thank you so much. What a beautiful, beautiful reading. I always feel we should have a few moments to pause. Yeah, there's my moment. But we'll now have Anita Pati reading from her book, Hiding to Nothing. Thanks, Jemma.
Thank you, Darren, for publishing Hiding to Nothing and for being such an amazing editor. And I want to thank the whole team at Pavilion Poetry too and Liverpool University Press. It's lovely to be here and really lovely to see so many friendly faces in the audience. Also, I'm really pleased to be published alongside both Jemma and Denise, both fantastic poets. So, Hiding to Nothing. One of the themes in Hiding to Nothing is cycles and their consequences, and how we can get caught in patterns that shape our lives. I want to say that there's some difficult issues that my reading will cover, and for that reason, I'm just going to give a quick content warning that some poems mention various violences, while others deal with difficulties having a child and baby loss. In the book, the white space and form tends to break up the intensity, and that can't happen so much in a reading. So the first one I'll read is Cycula. This looks at the cyclical nature of events, in this case violence, as well as the weather and their impacts. When I was writing this a couple of years ago, the country was flooding, as it is increasingly doing. Circular. When the flood spate again through the flat's front door and the toddler coughs, outside snuck in, sodden wall seeded, plaster blisters like cigarette burns on forgotten. These are the rivers of the north, swollen Irwell, Calder, Ouse, reaching an Escar where the gold fat glistens and the white gold and the gold fat glistens and the white blood foams in our plastic buckets. And the reek of a childhood seeped through these walls, rock gully, whip, overflow, fantail of milfoil, valley mist, rainfall, triggering sirens. When the oosages foam in their ministrations, but nobody listens. When they do, you're a cipher or a pain or a duty, but not love. Where do you go now for succor or for someone to stop it? How to be counted when your voice is the bubble that your small child blows, when the sky's drowning lungs burst into downpour, when it's soaked into earth, only earth can listen, mainlining water in some stinking glory, sending it pulsing into sewage-piped low-rise because who cares for us? You go on, you go on. Munju. Because he liked the toddy, because he twinkled for her, he beat her. Because he towered and she was a bird. Because he was soused and the kerosene cast to cook subzi exploded, it seems, and because her nylon sari of plum and curd kindled and flared like spather deer, the thatch flamed and the roof withered, he creased back her throat to see the sky. Because she laboured with filigree wrists of bone, a waist you could twist to feed her boys. Because the littler pined to be an American rocket star. His head bent up. The rain came in. And she'd take his whipping, always again on her keloid skin, because through the gap in the broken hut, she saw only stars. So Dodo Provocateur is the title poem of my pamphlet, which was published in 2019 by the Rialto. And I've included it here because I felt it summed up a lot of the themes in Hiding to Nothing. Objectification and consumption of female bodies, including those considered exotic or other, as well as violence and destruction. Although the dodo does seem to keep coming back in popular culture, so you can't kill it really. Dodo Provocateur. Europeans hunted you mercilessly because you beakies wouldn't be doves or albatross. Those whitish irises probably grotted and balled and seized. Black undertail coverts jutting at strumpet-starved sailors marooned on Mauritius. Exotic, just not Bideford, Perth or Poole. Why gobble pebbles big as nutmegs to temper your guts and prove fresh meat for rusky sailors declaring you foul? Belly and breast pleasant enough in flavour, they said. If only they'd waited a few decades later before they snuffed you forever for being cloven-footed. Turkey, you know, you and your bulging brethren could have been common as peacocks, not stuffed through your hooks in old Copenhagen or folded in sketchbooks. Mauritian Martha, who froze your fruity body in gin? Now of the Marthas exists only bitty skin, you pigeons. One day, the townsfolk ate the white meat of her irises with a dessert fork, Guernsey butter and garlic grubs, plus chips and curry sauce. Luckily, she couldn't see this, sadly. Because she was a witch, they grew back. stove my heart in. It's piping hot one day, cowers like placebo the next. Stove it in. I can build it up to punnets of plums, pulsing juice, but crush it in a box, crust its outsides with pink peppercorns, griddle it with liver, stove it. Such good spoken English. Paper dolls. So a lot of hiding to nothing is about belonging, unbelonging, and trying to find your place as migrants or children of migrants. And that's what this next poem tries to explore. Paper dolls, or where are my curly scrolls of sisters? They are wedging me open with lapwings, the feathers angled and birded to hurt, but I've a tight heart. Dad took the call, uprooted the brood to bake and balm cakes. Here, we're tiny, a fistful of morula massing. A leper soldiers salted cucumber in newspaper twists, then slipped drainwards. That's where you come from. Your hands are dirty. Shh. Shut your mouth while you eat, said the minor bird. No, said the settlers. Mum escaped through airmail script to slinky heat. That up-faced tooth extracts its roots. Such a mossy cliff. The cliff is crocheted pearl, natty whirlpools, round ligaments. Where are my larvic volcanic sisters? I'd crouch in the boiler room, making ski lifts from off Blue Peter. If we'd stayed, I'd have been the biggest family. You're so quiet, we thought you'd disappeared. Shh. Cut me a row of paper doll aunties. Keep cutting me inside with your instruments. You're making holes for light to get in. I'll stay in recovery if you nurse me. Where are my mockingbirds for sisters? Tetra Pak houses, rainy terraces, grey, no laughters. I've threaded the mothers on daisy chains, which I pluck sometimes, plant in oasis. Turmeric lightens the skin. We become cream boaters and lace. Fold up your plaits, village girl. I know I lapse. Please keep trying. So now blood fruit is the central sequence in the book, and it's a polyphonic sequence based on lots of voices, including mine, of women who struggled or delayed having a child or couldn't have one at all for all kinds of reasons, physical, emotional, circumstantial. I was seeing a lot of literature about the difficulties of early motherhood and childbirth, but not so much reflecting my own experience or that of the people I was meeting. So I interviewed people and based a sequence on it. I wanted to look at the less mainstream journeys that people take, often topics considered distasteful or that aren't really considered poetic. So these are excerpts from Blood Fruit, and so it doesn't look like this in the book. Naked in the mirror, I look at my face, my boobs, belly, those legs, side-eye my bum, poke out my tummy. Everything's there. So why can't I? Why not Bill Baby? I'm on precious cargo, not a real woman. My body's betrayed me. Obese, they keep telling me, but I pump iron like the best of them. The NHS makes me feel like some fat, disgusting whale that doesn't deserve to have kids. I'm 26. I was chubby, fat cow, they said. Took me till 38 before I let go of the body hang-ups. Worried about looking fat if pregnant, having to go up clothes sizes. Question. Isn't this all a bit vain? Answer. If I eat food, I'm scared they'll bully me, fatty, like they did at puberty, call me dirty, so I try not to eat in front of anybody. Question. What's this got to do with you not having a child? Before I met my husband, I went through a rape and I kept feeling that maybe because I let it happen, it was my fault, and that was the reason behind the infertility. Am I allowed to speak my grief, to stand up in church and say, I grieve like you for your absent and dead. I grieve too for my never born. Will you tire and tell me to get over it? One day at the altar, I'll tell you, because so many of us are silent. I'm childless, but God is bigger. Hope is bigger. Lactic. I found myself running out the bad blood, like a bat slicing through my head. I wasn't here, but sluicing out wormwoods at the Anglo-Saxon churchyard, blown through haylofts, nighting out my fret, pounding my feet, 3 miscarriages behind me. Each little heart stopped, each at 7 weeks, was when my own heart stopped. Sailing the drifts, wings like a pearled shawl, battening down upwinds. I carry these babies everywhere I go, over water meadows, municipal clockbacks. Others ignore them, spiked onto pinions, my starry hearts, or now warm cellular and lodged into muscle meat, tingling at my calves. And though I have a daughter now and could move forward, they settle in flesh memory, running through the blood. Try harder, adopt. IVF, just don't give up. You'll win, but don't be, a haggy, childless woman. We tried so hard for years and then they came and left at 20 weeks, my boys. This term is when they'd start their school at 5. This Christmas when they decimate their toys. Some days I just surrender to the pit. Insanity or marathons aren't me. Who celebrates the mother never lived, or children gone without a chance to be? But really nice to meet them. And I know the grainy scan showed Pete in disco dance. And Herbie, sulky, sucked his thumb at birth. And though I only met my twin boys once, they'll visit daily into my old age. We'll play date every day. And yes, I rage. I've not lost them like keys, some careless mishap. My boys are here. And this is the last poem for this section. Spells. On an unmade night, this heart kinks like an ace of spades in my skull. Red Shiraz spooks up my veins, but I come from nowhere quiet, soft sand. She shut my heart, and though the blood beat, it never opened. Still, sky's grey drops into a pudsey gut. Puddles wrinkle like twisterous skin. I blow into the seedy wind, dodge crabapple floods, green gulls wheel harumps, rise out of bed, sick to the core, tick off minutes, watch them crash to the wall. And along the hurly knife blade sings, I'm open chest with foul blood steep, and sleep with its nimitars pulls my dents. I'm awake, but sometimes only.
Anita, thank you so very much. Such extraordinarily moving poems, just such a pleasure every time I hear them. Thank you. So we'll finish with reading by Denise Saul's book, The Room Between Us.
I'd like to thank Darren for constant support of my book. And I'd like to also thank my new Pavilion family, Anita and Jemma, and to everyone here who has come to listen. I'll start with the opening poem of the collection, The Room Between Us. There you are, beside the telephone stand, waiting for me in a darkened room when I forced open the white door. There you lie behind it. I never found out why you grabbed a pewter angel instead of the receiver when you tried to call me that morning. I give up trying to lift you from the floor as the room is no longer between us. You point again to the Bible door wall before I whisper, it's all right, all right. Now tell me what happened before. The White Room. There is a moment for meditation when the doctor leads me into the room with table, bed, and cupboard. When he leaves, I look out of the small window. There's a view of other windows unknown. I never thought I'd make peace with noise. Chimes of the midnight bell, traffic, low-flying planes remind me that God is a never-ending white ceiling. I look at the right hand that doesn't move on the cushion, and I name it Paula. The clenched fingers look like a woman's head, and this is where I locate a mouth in this small fist. My mother experienced aphasia, a speech disability resulting to damage of the speech centers of the brain. And the aphasia, the language, is a beautiful one, and we learnt to communicate with other parts of the body. Minor variations. She squeezed my wrist, which meant I must carry on talking. There are 2 major hand gestures and 3 combined signs. I use 2 minor variations to tell her that I understand. The same fingers that confer a blessing can point to the window. No 2 hands are alike. The left hand holds the affected right arm. What she leaves out describing are the days of the week. She points too much, but no one has told her to stop. There are a lot of references to colour in the collection, which is really a relationship between loss and bereavement. Instructions for yellow. Saul's diary entry for September 2014. I feel nothing from the sunlight that falls on my face. It is impossible that we will talk about it again. A person in a room is affected by the colour of the walls. The yellowness we see in the garden is not a daffodil. She did not want us to wear black at the wake. I can't recall who was silent first. The surface of every body is affected by colour, and yellow will look the most vivid against a dark background. I thought she whispered something about the room, but she wanted to say, there are a lot of variations of the prose poem in my collection, and I was trying to create tension between space and relationships. The viewing. Behind another brown door into a windowless room, Julie, the director, removes the lace veil and maps her fingers on my mother's cheek. Perfect skin so smooth, no wrinkles, she says, as I walk around the room to view the off-white dress and beret covered with cream pearls. I want to tell my mother about how she still holds light and that this is the last day of seeing each other. Julie says she spent the afternoon reading aloud the horoscopes page from the daily newspaper. I thank Julie for sitting with her as she always does. No trouble at all. Virgo, she asks. Standing by the table, I bend over my mother again to take in the smell of florist rose perfume. No, Libra, I tell her. Libra. In the Guyanese culture, when somebody dies, the body is anointed with their favorite scent or perfume. And there's a belief that when they come back to visit their relatives, that the relatives will know who they are. Someone walked into a garden. He's the same one who gave us the word and took it away when we sat in the garden where bindweed climbed the wall. A bracket of cowslips gathered under the dogwood. This was where we heard him count 7 days into a week. We saw someone who looked like you, and when she turned around, it was me talking to myself. And I have dreamt this before, someone who walked into a garden. I know it's you when I talk with the god of roses. I have dreamt this often. Stone altar. I am not sure how the stone travelled from British Guyana, but the story goes my mother brought it to England to remind her of a passing, like the way one remembers the flight of a bird by keeping its feather. What I thought was limestone was chalk passed down from Grandmother Frances, found among other stones in a black handbag pushed to the back of a cabinet. That autumn, I asked my sister to tell me about the stone when I sifted through the possessions. When chalk gave away some dust, she held it up to the light and told me about other things in a world of decay. It seemed easy enough for her to wipe away the dust from her fingers. No one receives what they truly want. It took me a while to understand all of this when I placed the chalk on an altar next to blue kyanite stones I collected. One of the characteristics of aphasia is the miscommunication. Riddles. First riddle. Let the stairwell be made as dark as possible. You are here to forget everything that borders on light. And even walls and polished floor give way to the window. On a day like this one, you call on me to unlock doors. Let my turning remind you of a town you left behind. Second riddle. Some morning she wishes away hours on my clock of seeds. I am here to remind the daughter of everything that is white. Petals from the same dandelion appear different, but are the same. She has never learnt the art of letting go. Third riddle. Once I peeled a gala apple, not for myself, and made sure each slice was small enough for a mouth that could not open. I cut away the skin and dug out its core just as she liked it, but even then she could not eat. She held me with care as though I was made of fire. There are lots of references to spirituality in this collection. A prayer that may be said before she wakes. Thy will be done. Will you not teach me how to kneel in the temple of a garden? There is no morning prayer for us. Oh Father, you bring me back to a place where I must wake each morning. How I feel some belief in closing my eyes, but find days of stillness and turbulence in the line, thy will be done, when I cannot walk away from the call of a magpie. I can do nothing but listen to his words. Hallowed be thy name. He says magpies rest wreaths of yarrow on fallen birds. Thy will be done. If I say, so be it, there is only one person who hears. The ear relieves itself by hearing different bird songs forced upon it. I have enough March-like days to sit on the garden bench. I am cold all over. I'm really fascinated by when we leave, what objects remain. Heirlooms. 1. The rosary is white, no more white than the candle on my mother's altar, and yet this heirloom turns out to hold a replica of the cross carried by a man who was not afraid of dying. On days locked down, I wear her crosses, for the rule is always to pass on objects we no longer need. 2. I begin each day with signing the cross on my body. Mother's rosary is made up of decades. A decade is one Our Father, followed by 10 Hail Marys and a Glory Be. It is better to say 1 decade in the morning than 10 decades in the evening. By chanting 5, I complete 1 circuit of beads. As I chant, I think about my brother's days. There are almost 5 decades to think about when I count the bead touchings. 3. I wear the silver cross around my neck, but it may be many years before it can be passed on again. I once asked myself what it would feel like to pray before an object when its nature was hidden from me. For a God who doesn't reveal his true intentions is not a God at all. 4. I end some days with holding what was never mine. Anima Christi, novenas, Gucci reading glasses, Book of Psalms, Guyanese gold bracelet, St. Christopher's pendant, Book of Prayers for the Living. And this is the last poem. How the crystal healer brings light back to a body. To live in the shadow of crystals, I must first know their names. Because rose quartz chooses to move what it touches, I place the crystal under her feet. I have learnt how to channel light from a crystal into her head, arm and leg. On Friday, her eyes told me she was now ready to climb the heavens. For a mother to leave the ruined sanctuary of this house, I say, let us dedicate rose quartz to cleansing the body. Allow her to leave with ease, without water, with frankincense. Even Jacob dreamt of the way to the heavens as by a broken ladder. I remember how my brother stood at the foot of a ladder in the yard, but could not climb it. When I look out of the window, there is the light I cannot keep. In a house like this, I repeat the names of those I serve. Celestite, Iris, turquoise. Yet again, God shapeshifts of his own accord to rocks of severity and mercy.
Oh, Denise, thank you. Thank you so much. It's just extraordinary, the power that is so contained in those poems. And I know I can sort of hear the silence all across the listeners. Such extraordinary poems from the three of you. And obviously I've spent a lot of time with these books and with all of you as these books have come into being. But what I really noticed tonight was the extraordinary connections between the three books. And this often happens, but it made me think how much the work is invested in all of your poems, in the body, but also in the limits of the body, and the fragility of the body, but also in the limits of language as well. There's a sort of fragility there and a desire to push language to extreme places as well. So it was really wonderful to hear those three readings. If anybody has got some questions, we've got a little bit of time now. If you'd like to ask Denise and Anita and Jemma anything in particular, then do fire ahead. I'm just looking in the chat box here. So many people enjoying. I think people are just digesting what they've heard, in fact. I wonder if I can ask just some quick questions, really. I wanted to ask you, Anita, just about the way in which you're using language and syntax and how you're thinking about that, because one of the things that I find when I'm listening is that I'm being pulled in lots of different directions and constantly surprised. Sometimes I'm being kind of charged to laugh, and I'm not quite sure what that physical feeling is that's coming out as laughter in me is. But maybe you could talk a little bit about the way in which those poems move around so much.
Well, I think with me in language, I've always found it quite difficult to express myself in the language that I've got. People are often surprised that I've only got one language. And I think it's fluidity and flexibility. This is the only way that I can kind of make it my own and say what I need to say in it. Is that what you're kind of getting at?
Absolutely, and there's such an extraordinary connection there with Denise's work when she's thinking about aphasia. Perhaps you could talk a little bit about that, Denise, and about the challenges that brought up in terms of trying to think about the difficulties of communication in language.
Yeah, I think with me at the start, when I was putting together the collection, I had difficulties when trying to capsulate language and the silences which occurred. And I started off playing around with prose poetry form just to experiment with the spacing. And that helped to add tension between the words and the spaces which the body experienced. So for me, it was more to do with form. I hope I answered it correctly. I can't quite hear you, Darren.
No, absolutely, absolutely. And just to kind of connect that again with Jemma, I mean, this sense of the material being so important and yet things escaping the material that runs through all of your work as well. And in your work, Jemma, too, this kind of reaching for spiritual places beyond the body, and yet also being quite curious, skeptical, teasing those ideas, not falling into sort of cliches around divides between the spiritual and the material. I wonder, Jemma, if you're there, if you could just talk a little bit about that and how that connects with your background in zoology and ecology. It's probably a really difficult question. I'm sorry I saved that, wandered to that. Is Jemma still here?
Jemma,
Jemma, you're muted, Jemma.
muted, yeah.
Are you muted?
Better. Okay. Yeah, you know, I think it's just that, you know, it's always that kind of seeking for a wholeness, I suppose. And I think because, you know, science is very much concerned with the material and material reality, but of course it's the material reality which, you know, which is transcending and is beautiful and is spiritual. And I think it's that trying to bring the two things together. And which is why I was sort of talking about translation between science and poetry, because it's not, obviously there's a sort of, you know, the thing about sort of bringing ideas back and forwards, but I think also just that thing about the sensuality and the intellectual and how you kind of can bring that together into language at the same time. That's something that really kind of interests me, and you know, it is a work in progress really, but it's you know, there's sort of that idea, I guess, in science that you are, you know, the observer who's very much removed from what you're studying. And, you know, although there's sort of some truth to that in a way, it's also, you know, that really isn't how we experience reality. And, you know, and science knows that too. And it's kind of just getting these two things together in the same place, I guess.
It's a wonderful answer, thank you. I just see that Shash Travitt's got a question here. I've got a question for Anita. I loved the blood fruit section. I'm curious about the voices that emerged from that section. How easy was it to capture the voices of the women you interviewed? And did you change much in order to craft the poems? Thank you.
Thanks for that question, Shash. So with blood fruit, how easy was it to capture the voices? So I interviewed women, I put a call out, I interviewed women about their difficult path to parenthood, if at all, motherhood. And there were lots of stages to writing blood fruit. So having interviewed them, having found them, then I transcribed the poems, and the difficult bit was the jump from the transcription to the poems. I had no idea how I was going to, what that process was going to be and how I was going to do it. I had no idea. I knew I was going to write a sequence, but I didn't know how to write the sequence. So the difficult bit, how easy was it? The difficult part was the technical part in structuring it. I mean, the voices were given to me by the women who spoke to me. Did I change them much? A lot of them, I used their words verbatim. I thought it was really important to use the words that they used. I did shape the poems, and I did make some of them into more of a kind of recognizable poem, but it was really important to me to represent their stories in the way that they told them to me. So I kind of hope I've done that. But I was very, like I said, I was quite stuck with the form. And so I had no idea. And Darren had suggested a few books to read, and one that I think helped in the organization of the material was C.D. Wright's One Big Self, I think it's called, where she traveled around the southern states of Northern America and interviewed people in state penitentiaries, in prisons. Hers is very different, but it gave me a starting point as to how to organize the material, but she shaped it quite differently. I don't know if that's answered your question.
There's such an ethical place in which you're thinking these things through. And I was again thinking about this with everybody's book tonight. You know, how we observe, how we integrate, how we voice other people's feelings, ideas, thoughts, bodies, emotions, and how we place ourselves in relation to that is so important when thinking about, you know, the loved one who is unwell, or in thinking about that relationship between mother and child that is there in your book, Anita, and Denise's book. and in very many different ways as well in Jemma's book as well. And I think those ethical questions are ones that you were all asking yourselves all the way through the books, in quite extraordinary ways, actually. There was no place of rest for you, no complacency as you were doing that. I saw that firsthand. If there aren't any more questions, I know there's a lot to digest. I'd just like to ask our poets to end the evening with one more poem. I'm just going to remind you as well that you're entitled for your 3 for 2 bundle. It's there again, the discount code Pavilion 22 if you go onto the LUP website. But if I can ask now Denise to start off by reading a poem. I won't introduce everybody again, but Denise will read Anita, and we'll just end up with a poem by Jemma. Thank you all so much for your support, for being here. It's really extraordinary to see nearly 100 people in our strangely public, strangely intimate sitting rooms where we all are. It's been a pleasure to spend this time with everybody this evening. So I'm going to leave things now back with the poets. Thank you so much.
A woman travels in search of sound. On the move again, this time to Surrey, but I could not take with me all the plants my family left behind. The row of simple petunias made their last appearance this summer. All the plants, I hear them, and the quieter they are, the more I hear them. The breaking sound of twigs comes to me as I clear away leaves under bushes. A helicopter overhead circles the house. Its presence breaks the many silences of grass. I hear all the registers of flowers. Newton was not the first to make a connection with the ways of green. It's part yellow and part blue. Here the petunias follow mother's ordering of size rather than of importance. Even with the final walk from the side gate to the removal van, I hear the unequal division of sound between the tread on a concrete path and quiet water pooling beneath the gutter.
Shall I just go?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so the final poem, my final poem is the first one in the book. And I'm sure you know, but just to say that a triolet is a short French poem form where the lines repeat. Train triolet, 1646 to Brighton. I won't blow you up because I'm brown. Oh, twitchy woman who grassed up my shopping. I went to the loo, not to twiddle my belt. I won't blow you up because I'm brown. Terrorists don't tend to buy Cath Kidston unless I am a clean-skinned moron. Because I'm brown, I won't blow you up. Oh, native woman who grassed up my shopping.
Okay, you can hear me still. Unripe. What can I tell my son to help him sleep? The narratives of grief are still unripe, a song of hammers in the pale dark. I could tell him how the pine trees work to bear their cones, to write the book of their ancestors among sharp needles, the strange looking fists and fistulas that the slow green sap feeds. I could tell him the shade is saner than the light, despite what they tell us about gloom. The darkness is more honest. It listens harder too. He knows that. He feels that in August's airless room, when all the world is changed by dulled night vision and the sparkling in his owl ears. I could tell him that the nascent cones break out in the pine limbs, as though sorrow could take on form? Or is it only that I see grief everywhere? I open the window a little. Outside, the parched trees creak with the weight of stories that are slowly losing sense. How to be a tree without rain. How to climb a mountain if a mountain isn't there. He can't sleep until the story ends, he says. Outside, the hammer keeps pounding the nail. But what are we building if it's not a future? I can't tell him what I see with my eyes closed, so many mouths pushing up against the dry earth as though they were fish at the surface of a pond and they cannot breathe. What they say I can't hear relentlessly. The membrane between us will not yield. My son asks if it's a door banging in the wind. He says he sees a figure standing by his bed. I could tell him we live in a porous world and that the door is never closed. But we still must sleep, I say. I know you're afraid. What ripens the cone if it is not hope?
Thank you so much, Jemma, Borg, Anita, Pati, and Denise, Saul, and wonderful to end on that great word, hope. Thank you all for being there with us this evening, and we'll say goodbye now. Thank you.
Thank you.